Many women who deeply love God don't realize that there's a difference between living from who they truly are and living from who they've learned that they need to be. Hello, my friends. Come on in. I always consider it a gift to be able to spend this time with you. If you've been here before, welcome back. And if this is your first time joining me, an especially warm welcome to you. I'm glad you found your way here. I'm Lucy Ann, and here at Amazing by Design, we intentionally take a pause from the noise and the busyness of our everyday lives, and we come together to have honest conversations about how faith interacts with our daily lives and what it looks like to live connected with God from the inside out without pressure or performance. So, if you can, go ahead and grab your mug of coffee or tea and let's settle into today's conversation. There's been something quietly sitting in my spirit lately, and the more I pay attention to it, the more I realize it deserves its own conversation. Perhaps you've noticed it too. It's this idea of what it really means for us as women of God to live from who we truly are. Because over the years, I have noticed something that seems to keep showing up again and again. Many women who deeply love God don't realize that there's a difference between living from who they truly are and living from who they've learned that they need to be. Now, I know that could seem like a big statement, but stick with me for a moment because many of us have spent years learning who we needed to become in order to navigate our everyday lives. We've learned to be dependable. We've learned how to be the strong one. We certainly have learned how to carry more than our share. We learn how to keep the peace, and we learn how to avoid disappointing people. And none of that, in and of itself, is necessarily wrong. In fact, many of those things may have helped us navigate our everyday lives very well. But after a while, if we're not paying attention, we can begin to confuse who we've learned to be with who we truly are. And I've come to notice that this is where many women begin feeling lost inside their own lives. It's not because they've stopped loving God or they've stopped caring, and it's certainly not because they've failed in any way, but because somewhere along the way, they became so focused on being who they believed they needed to be that they slowly lost connection with who they truly are. Now, most of the time, this doesn't happen all at once. It's pretty subtle, it's gradual. And the tricky part is, it's often wrapped inside the things that we hold dear. For instance, love, responsibility, faithfulness, service, and caring for others. Until one day, something deep within us begins to whisper, something feels off. And I have realized that this is where many of us miss it. Think about it. We're not always taught to honor those internal signals. Rather, for the most part, we're often taught to override them. So consequently, we begin talking to ourselves, and it sounds like this: I can handle this. I can go that extra mile. Sure, I can add another thing to my already full plate. I'll do whatever it takes to keep the peace. I'll absorb all the discomfort and I'll find a way to make this work. And then there's the times that we say yes, even though everything within us is saying no, because that's become second nature for us. And sometimes we even spiritualize it. We assume that following Jesus always means doing more, carrying more, staying longer, or absorbing more than God ever asked of us. And in doing so, we learned how to abandon what is true inside of us in order to preserve something outside of us. But today, I want us to consider this. What if who God designed us to be looks totally different than all of that? What if we can still be loving to others while staying in tune to our own needs? What if being faithful means saying no more often? And what if being strong means taking time to rest? Now, I say this with so much compassion because I realize this is complicated, especially for us women. I totally get it. Women don't override themselves because they don't care. It's actually the opposite. They override themselves because they care deeply. They care about people, their relationships. They care about doing what's right and honoring God. And that's why this can get so messy. Because what may look like love and service, faithfulness, responsibility, or even spiritual maturity on the outside may actually be the thing that is pulling us away from who we truly are. And eventually, that cost begins to take its toll. Maybe not all at once. However, maybe slowly you begin to notice you are more tense than peaceful. You're more reactive than present. More internally conflicted than grounded. Not to mention more exhausted than feeling alive. Now, you may still be getting through your day, doing all the things, but inside, it's becoming more and more difficult to ignore the feeling of disconnection. And at some point, the pain of continuing to live incongruently becomes greater than the discomfort of changing. And maybe that's when the real questions begin to rise. For instance, what if living from who you truly are is not selfish? What if honoring what is true within you does not make you less loving? And what if paying attention to the signals your body is giving you is actually good stewardship? And what if what you're sensing in your body isn't a problem, but it's actually alerting you to something that deserves your attention? And the tension that you're feeling, it's not proof that you're failing. But what if it's an invitation to notice where you are no longer living in congruence with who God created you to be? And this is where awareness begins to change everything. Not because awareness fixes things overnight. It doesn't. But it does change the relationship. When you begin to notice what's happening inside of you, you no longer have to automatically obey the old patterns. You can give yourself time to pause and reflect. You can invite God into your everyday decision making. You can ask Him, what do you want me to know here? And what do you want me to do? And then you can simply become aware of how He speaks to you personally. Because the way He speaks to me and the way He speaks to you is different. He's created us each uniquely. So the way He speaks to us is going to sound different. So it's important for us to tap into how it is God is speaking to us individually. And then in those moments, you can begin interpreting your life through His truth. And quite frankly, that's a very different way to live. Because the world's way will usually pressure you to act quickly. Truth will invite you to pay attention. What you've learned through the lens of the world will tell you that you are responsible for keeping everyone else happy. Truth will remind you that you are responsible to walk faithfully with God. And what you've learned will tell you that disappointing someone means that you're doing something wrong. On the other hand, truth will remind you that obedience and people pleasing are not the same thing. And little by little, self-trust will begin to rebuild. Not self-trust apart from God, but self-trust with God. It's then that you begin realizing it's okay to pay attention to what's happening inside of me. I can honor truth. I can respond instead of reacting. And I can stop abandoning myself to save everyone else. And the beautiful thing is, as that happens, trust in God becomes real in such a deeper way. Because there's also a difference between believing in God and His promises in our hearts and making that belief a reality. This is what I mean. Sure, we love God and we trust Him in theory, but when the complexities of our everyday life arise, when someone is disappointed, when a relationship shifts, when the voice of guilt gets loud, and when we are misunderstood, that's where our faith moves from belief into lived reality. Because living from who you truly are requires you to stop trying to do what only God can do. It requires you to let God be God in all areas of your life. It requires you to release what was never yours to manage and to stop rescuing what He has not asked you to rescue and to stop carrying the outcomes that were never placed in your hands. And I have realized something deeply important in my own life. When I'm living from who I truly am, I allow God to be who He truly is. And what I've discovered is that God shows up in ways only He can. And it's always far better than I ever could have imagined. And that right there settles something in me all the time. There's freedom in that truth. Because I've come to understand when I'm not living from who I truly am, I'll tend to manage. I'll spend hours overthinking. I overcarry responsibilities. and I make it my responsibility to hold everything together. But when I'm living from who I truly am, there's peace. There's no striving. There's curiosity and room to listen and room to trust. There's room for God to move without me trying to control the outcome. And it also means not everyone around me will understand. But that is part of the honesty of this conversation and why it's so important that we have it. When you begin living from who you truly are, some relationships may shift. Some people may be grateful for your honesty. Some may begin to take responsibility for themselves in new ways. Some may draw closer because your peace makes them feel safe. And some may even approach you and say, I want what you have. But others, on the other hand, they may resist. Some may push your boundaries. Some might outright misunderstand you. And some will even pull away. And I know that can be painful, but it also can be very clarifying. And this is why. Because when you stop organizing your life around guilt, pressure, and self-abandonment, relationships will begin to reorganize around truth. Not control, not performance, not manipulation, not keeping everyone comfortable. Truth. And here's what I want you to hear clearly. Living from who you truly are does not reduce your ability to love. It actually restores your ability to love without abandoning yourself in the process. It increases your capacity to love cleanly, no strings attached, no pressure needed. It increases your capacity to serve freely, to stay present, to build those deeper relationships, to offer honesty without resentment, to be loving towards others while also being loving towards yourself. None of that is selfishness. That's congruence. That's wholeness. That is being deeply faithful. And today, there's no pressure to figure it all out. Rather, the invitation is simply to begin to take notice. Here's a few questions to take notice of this week. In what ways have you been living from who you've learned to be rather than from who you truly are? Where has your body been alerting you to something that you keep dismissing? And what might it look like, even in one small way, to allow who you truly are to be present today? Not the version of yourself that has been shaped through pressure to be who you think you need to be, but the woman God designed you to be. You know, that woman that has always been there. Sure, maybe now she's buried beneath years of learning who you thought you needed to be. Maybe she's quiet. Maybe she feels somewhat unfamiliar. But she's not gone. The good news is, you don't have to become someone new. You're not trying to manufacture an identity, but rather you are learning to reconnect with what God placed within you from the very beginning. And He's walking with you every step of the way. And as you step into this invitation, my prayer for you is this: that you may begin to recognize that there is a difference between who you've learned to be and who God created you to be. That you will become safe enough with God to stop silencing what He never asked you to silence. That you will learn to honor truth without guilt. That you will discover that peace is not a sign of weakness, and self-respect is not being selfish. That love does not require you to override yourself, and that living from who you truly are may be one of the most faithful ways you allow God to be who He truly is in your life. And that kind of steadiness, that kind of honest, grounded, faith-filled living is something that we keep learning here in this space together. So if you desire to keep having conversations like this, you'll find me here every week. And if you feel led to explore this work more deeply, there's a link in the show notes where you can schedule a discovery call with me. It's there when the time feels right for you. But for now, hold on to this thought. The most faithful thing you can do is to live from who you truly are and trust God to be who He truly is. And I'll always be here to remind you, you are chosen, you are loved, you are amazing by design.